All right, it is Thursday, July 13th, 2023. And folks, you are listening to the MMA Eco Live podcast. I, as always, am your host, Chris Presnell, coming at you live from beautiful Portland, Oregon, USA. And in this podcast, we like to go over the entire Asian MMA schedule for the upcoming weekend, where I highlight different fights, events, prospects, everything like that, touch on UFC events. And then after that, I will get to your questions. So feel free to leave those into the chat and I will get to those later. Keep it kind, keep it civil, and we will get going here. So overall, things this weekend are a little bit lighter on all fronts. We've got a UFC event that's been taking a lot of crap from fans for being a little bit lighter, a lot lighter, typical kind of Apex card, a main event that some have criticized not being the most exciting, doesn't really get many people's blood going, but could actually be a fairly important fight, all things said and done, as things pan out. But really just a couple Asian MMA events other than that. But if you enjoy this podcast, would appreciate it very much if you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and stay tuned because I'm going to be throwing out more and more videos about Asian MMA, UFC. Hopefully this weekend, as early as tomorrow, be putting out a video about my experience with Threads. Y'all downloaded Threads yet? It is the app from Meta that is kind of supposed to be competing with Twitter, although they've said it's not meant to be a replacement for Twitter, but more like capitalizing on people that don't want to use Twitter. Twitter was never really a good fit for them, but they still want to have conversations with others. So I'm going to be. I basically made the hard switch, just cold turkey from Twitter to Threads, just to see just to immerse myself in the app and see how much of my following would transfer over, all of that. And so I'm going to make a video, hopefully this weekend, that'll kind of unpack different things that I found, especially covering it in the MMA media space, different observations I've had. So be on the watch for that. And but otherwise, let's get into some of the events this weekend. So the first one that we have coming up is One Fight Night 12. This is going down from Bangkok, Thailand on Friday night here in the West, or if you're in Asia, that's going to be on Saturday morning. Also, kind of like the UFC event this weekend, a little bit smaller of an event. Not a whole lot of like gangbuster stars on this card. No title fight, although there was supposed to be a title fight between Tong Kai and Tan Lei that was supposed to be on the card, but I believe it was Tan Lei that got, or I can't remember who got injured. I think it actually might have been Tong Kai who was injured. Either way, there is no title fight for this One Fight Night 12 event. Instead, we have a fight between Superlek and Polylov in the main event, and a couple MMA fights, a couple interesting looking MMA fights that may not like grab a lot of headlines, but I think should be pretty good fights. The first of those fights that I'm going to highlight, both of these fights feature Chinese fighters, as you could potentially guess with if you're familiar with my work. But interesting fight between Walter Gonçalves of Brazil and Banma Duoji. So Banma is a really young Tibetan fighter that has trained out of the Unbo Fight Gym in China. Same gym that's produced the likes of Song Yadong, Sumu Darji, Rongju, Ijia, all those guys. Banma Duoji was another fighter out of here. When he signed with One Championship, he was undefeated, something around 13-0. And so they signed this guy kind of with a lot of hype behind him, and then he loses his first fight and One Championship. And then he's been gone for a couple years. It's been at least 2 years since we've seen Banma Duoji, but he is back, and in a very strange fight, although these fights are going to be more and more common as we watch one championship where they've got a Muay Thai fighter in Brazil's Walter Gonçalves transitioning over to MMA to fight Banma. Walter, I don't believe, has fought in any MMA fights before, so it's literally going to be like 13-1 versus 0-0. Definitely strange, and one of those fights that you're most likely to really only see at one championship, or maybe Ryzen. But obviously, you're going to expect Banma to try and shoot and get this to the ground as soon as possible. His striking is pretty good, but I think we're going to like. I wouldn't necessarily say that Banma is a characteristic grappler, but this is going to be an like in strategy wise, you're not going to find a more like striker versus grappler fight in modern MMA unless you throw Chrome Gracie into another fight. But yeah, very interested in this fight, mostly in what Banma has been up to the last couple of years. So let's watch for that. We've also got a pretty good fight between Xie Wei and Yuya Wakamatsu. Both guys are about the same age, similar records in one championship. Both pretty good fighters, right? Like square in their prime or starting their prime. Xie Wei just coming off of a loss to Reese McLaren, who got choked out. But before that, had some pretty good knockout wins to his record. Yuya Wakamatsu also had some pretty good knockout wins. And so if these guys decide to keep it standing, it could be a pretty good strikers fight. So I'm really excited for that fight. I think that could be really entertaining. Other than that, you've also got two other MMA fights. You've got Amir Ali Akbari versus Dustin Johnson. Always enjoy watching, three more fights. Got Ali Akbari versus Dustin Johnson of Canada. Also got the Akbar Abdullayev of Kyrgyzstan, 9-0 Kyrgyz fighter fighting Aaron Kenyarte. And then in the co-main event, you've got Gary Tonin fighting Shamil Ghasanov. This could be a number one contender fight in that division. So yeah, that should be a good fight. I don't know who I'd pick if this goes to the ground. I mean, I guess I would pick Gary Tonin, but Ghasanov is a beast in Sambo, so this should be fun. Although if we're just like comparing, like if this was just a grappling match, I would hands down pick Gary Tonin, because we've seen this story in one championship before, right? We've seen Jiu-Jitsu guy versus Sambo guy, and the BJJ guy usually wins. So because of that, I think Gary Tonin will probably take this, but yeah, I'll bet you Ghasanov tries to keep this standing as much as he can. So some interesting fights on this one championship card. Also, this is a card that you probably wouldn't know about unless you follow me in my page, but this is going down in Bali, Indonesia. This is Canggu Fight Night 26. These events are hosted by Bali MMA, and they've been continually getting better and better guys. So usually they'll just kind of throw together some guys from their gym against other guys from the island or throughout Indonesia. Sometimes they'll get guys from out of Indonesia to come in and fight, and they have a couple of those fighters here. For example, they got Jada Ketley, who trains at Bong Tao MMA. They brought her in to fight at this event. So and I believe Jada just signed with Ruby Sports this week, so she has new management as well. But I think this should be a pretty good event. I highlighted a lot of these fighters on my social media this week, and just to kind of go through a couple of these fighters. And this fight card is not yet on Tapology, so unfortunately, I believe the only place you can see this fight card is on their social media page. But you've got a One Pride fighter on there who's 4-1, Laurentius Adi. He's in the main event. You've got two pretty good heavyweight prospects. Got a 7-1-1 guy from I think that's Guam, Mose Afoa, that's American Samoa. And then he's fighting a 6-1 heavyweight Indonesian fighter. When was the last time you saw one of those guys? Vincent Majid. And you've also got a guy from one championship, Muhammad Aiman from Malaysia. He's on the card as well. So interested to watch this card. I don't believe that there is a live broadcast, but they they've been putting the fight videos on their YouTube channel after the fact. So I'll be looking for that, and if there's any interesting highlights, I'll be sure to post those. But yeah, definitely give them a follow. I'm really just excited to see more of these Indonesian promotions spring up. We've also got Soma Fight Series, and then the kind of legacy event there, One Pride MMA, always doing great things there. So Indonesian MMA is always fun to track and see what's coming up. So I'm excited to watch this event and see the results. Really, the only other Asian MMA event that I know of this weekend, and sorry, this isn't even an Asian MMA event, but this is just the UFC event this Saturday. I'm really interested to see both guys, especially. I love this fight between Azat Maksum and Tyson Nam. Tyson Nam is so experienced and pretty well rounded. He's getting a little bit old. I think he's 38 or 39. And so he's kind of at near the end of his career, but he's really experienced, and in my opinion, the perfect fighter to see where Azat Maksum is going into the UFC. Maksum has fought good, but I would not say great competition so far in his pro career. He is 16-0, but he hasn't really fought, I would say, the best fighters that were available. Different reasons why those fights may have not come together. It's also interesting that he hasn't fought for the Octagon belt in a long time. He won that flyweight championship back in 2019, but then he vacated it to fight in other promotions like Brave, like Niza, and then he came back to Octagon, but they haven't set him up with a title fight yet. And I'm not sure what the reason is behind that. I'm not sure if that is because they expected him to sign with the UFC or what, but for whatever reason, Azat Maksum kind of just been taking these one-off fights against these random guys out of Brazil, or been fighting with Brave as well. So I think it's good that he's getting a guy like Tyson Nam, who's really experienced, has a lot more fights than he does, just so we can kind of see where is he at. If you want to get a more complete kind of breakdown of Azat Maksum, or I should say in-depth, not complete by any stretch of the imagination, but you can check out the video that I posted the other day. I looked at Azat Maksum's last 3 fights and kind of did some live commentary on certain parts and highlighted some things that I was noticing about his fighting style. So if you want to kind of get a crash course on Azat Maksum, that's the best place to start. And I think that he will probably win this fight, but I think he also could get challenged unless he's able to put away Tyson Nam with that overhand right early in the fight. But looking forward to that one. The other fight featuring an Asian fighter at this UFC event this weekend is Park Jun Yong versus Albert Duraev. This is at middleweight. And I really, really like this fight because for Albert Duraev, he's a couple spots, 10 or so fighters below the middleweight rankings. He lost his fight 2 fights ago, and then of course that was by doctor stoppage. And then he won a split decision against Chidi Njokuani that some people scored for Njokuani, obviously one of the judges. And then so he's kind of like right below there. And then on the meantime, Park has won his last 3, finished his last 2 opponents by choke. So he's kind of coming into that space. And last time he was in that zone, he fought Gregory Rodriguez and lost by standing TKO. And so then he got some opponents that he was pretty overmatched against, guys like Joseph Holmes, Dennis Tululin, was able to breeze past those guys, and now he's kind of back in that space where it's like you're not necessarily fighting to get into the ranked competition, but just kind of seeing if you're in that higher level of the division. So I think this should be a pretty good fight. If I were to guess, I would say Duraev will probably take this by decision, by wrestling. Park is pretty tough to put away, but we could. I mean, Park is a really tough guy. He's a tough guy to crack. I'll call him the Iron Turtle for nothing. So I think it should be an interesting fight. May not always be the most exciting at all times, but I think it should be at least be very competitive. So looking forward to that fight. And then I believe that's all that we have in terms of Asian MMA this weekend. Like I said, a lighter schedule. I did see a couple little tidbits. I did see that JCK is coming back. At first they had posted that they would have an event on July 22nd, but now I've heard that it's going to be August. So JCK have their first installment of their finals. That was last Sunday, and it was a great event. A lot of really great performances, highlighted a lot of really good fighters out of China right now. And they have two more finals left. They have Aziz Kadirov versus Ayaka Akinbieka, and then they have Korbanjong Tulosabaka versus Ding Meng for the third time. So the lightweight and welterweight finals are still yet to take place. The big guy to watch out of all of this is Aziz Kadirov. He's the best fighter to come out of this season of JCK. Behind him, I would probably say Wang Jijung, who just won the featherweight championship. Of course, you've got Shang Jaffa in there. He's really good, but I just wonder, like, what's his? I guess his future is to stay with JCK and keep fighting in these tournaments, because he just won a boatload of cash at the finals this last weekend. He won the flyweight finals. So looking forward to that whenever that comes up. And I need to go over this article again, because JCK said that they were going to radically change their competition system when they restart things. It sounded like it was a little bit more of a standard system, which I do like that. I don't know that the tournament format was totally working for them, in all honesty. And part of that was just because interruptions from the pandemic. But I need to go over it again because it still seemed a little bit complicated. They definitely have like the most complicated system in all of MMA right now. I do not fully understand it. And is there a language barrier for me? Yeah, but it is really complex. Like, so much more complex than just like standard tournament. There's a lot of pieces to it, and divisions and this and that. So yeah, I'll go over that article again and see what I can find out. In other Chinese news, I am hearing word of that a Chinese fighter has signed with the UFC, a pretty like top prospect, someone that's been a top prospect for a long time. So trying to figure out, I'm trying to confirm. I'm literally talking to this fighter's manager like just before I hopped on here, and gonna see if I can figure out, like, are they gonna try and get them in Singapore? We'll see. But I did hear that from some pretty solid sources that a new Chinese fighter has been added to the UFC roster. I think it should be a good one for sure. So I will let you guys know and hopefully be able to break that news ASAP. But otherwise, let's get into your questions. Appreciate all of your questions. All right. Why are they trying to sell that Holly Holm versus Buena Silva as a good main event? You know as well as I do that it's bad. The card is bad. 8th fight on the card is the only fighter coming off a win. Yeah, there's been a lot of criticism about that. Earlier in the show, I mentioned that while it may not really be the most exciting main event, not only to watch, but in your anticipation before the fight, I think that it could end up being a pretty consequential main event for the division. But first, I'll get to your question of why are they promoting it as a good main event. I think a lot of it has to do with Holly Holm and her draw power, whatever that means. Once she knocked out Ronda Rousey, she's just like, I mean, you all know, she just hops in and out title fights all the time. She's got 2.5 million followers on Instagram and has been a pretty reliable person, I think, to draw good numbers for the UFC. even though she hasn't had a whole lot, like a lot of her fights, especially recently, have not been very exciting, not a lot of finishes. So I don't know that this will be the most exciting main event unless Buena Silva surprises us. But I think you and I both know, and the UFC knows, that the state of the bantamweight and featherweight division in the UFC is not a great place. However, it's probably in a better place now than ever with Amanda Nunes leaving the UFC. As great as Amanda Nunes was, and really she put on like pretty good fights. I mean, she never had a reputation as being a boring fighter. Sometimes her fights were really one-sided, and so the fights weren't all that exciting. But now that she is gone, there is an opportunity for there to be a lot more equity in both the bantamweight and featherweight division if they should decide to keep it around. All of a sudden, all these fighters that have challenged for that belt, but can't really challenge for it again because they've already lost him on Nunes. They're suddenly active players again. So this is one of those fights that is definitely could. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about who the UFC is going to choose to fight for that bantamweight title. Probably near the end of the year, but I think it is possible that we could see the winner of this fight being one of those fighters. I don't. Juliana Pena broke a rib back in June, and so I'm not sure what her recovery is like. I would think that she's probably the first choice to fight in for the belt. I would think merely just because she was a backup fighter for that fight, that I would think that Raquel Pennington would be another solid choice. I know that's not a fight that gets a lot of people excited, but really, which fight at bantamweight will get people excited? You just got to keep the division moving. So, but this is another fight where, especially if one fighter comes off with a big finish, then they could find themselves slotted into that vacant bantamweight title shot. So, I think that is kind of how I'm looking at this fight and kind of getting a temperature for where things are going. Also, Holly Holm has fought at featherweight, and so it wouldn't be like, what if Holly Holm wants to go to featherweight and challenge for that belt? I think that's a really real possibility. It's wide open for her. She's getting older. I don't know what her weight cuts are like, but they're definitely not probably getting easier as she's getting older. So with Holly Holm being such a big someone that does really good numbers for the UFC, I could definitely see the UFC keeping around featherweight. Holly Holm wants to fight for that belt. And then we've also got another featherweight fight on this card, Norma Dumont versus Chelsea Chandler. Well, actually, is that fight at welterweight or is that at bantamweight? Interesting stuff coming out of Chelsea Chandler this week, right, guys? Talking about Ronda Rousey coming back at featherweight, and then also kind of like telling the UFC to build the division around her. So this fight is at featherweight. So if I don't know what's going to happen with featherweight, guys, but I think it's I'm not I'm more hopeful that they're going to keep the division around. When I say hopeful, I'm not saying I really want it. I'm just saying I'm more optimistic that they're going to keep the division around, especially like if Chelsea Chandler can really put on a big performance. If Holly Holm wants to go up to 145, and then got Eileen Perez, who prefers to fight at 145. I know she's 0-1 in the UFC, so she has to prove herself first. But who knows? Maybe the UFC will finally try now that Amanda Nunes is gone, and they can have a new champion. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm seeing this event this Saturday. A couple important fights, even if they're not really like attention grabbing, surface. Would I recommend Asian talent to go through Road to UFC instead of Contender Series? Like, I'm not sure why Mahashate went to Contender Series to get a small contract when he could have done really well in Road to UFC. He did go to Contender Series before they had Road to UFC. So there is that. He would have just waited around. I think that Asian fighters should try to go through Road to UFC the risk of not getting into the UFC is higher in Road to UFC. There are certain risks with Road to UFC, but then there are other certain risks with Contender Series. With Road to UFC, what are your risks? Your risk is that in one of the 3 opponents that you fight, one of them will be really good and beat you. You also, since it's over a longer period of time, you're risking yourself to more injuries. So those are the risks with Road to UFC. With Contender Series, the risk that you're running is for an Asian fighter, you're fighting on an opposite time zone of yours. That, I think that was probably, that added to some of the bad success, or some of the defeats that the Chinese fighters suffered when they fought in Contender Series, was just all traveling to the US, getting used to the time zone, the food, everything like that, and fighting there in the UFC Apex. So if you're an Asian fighter, especially if you're a Chinese fighter, you're fighting more close to your home comfort zone. So there's a risk in going through Contender Series with that. And then you're also just fighting fighters that are more likely, honestly, to beat you, because their skill set and training is probably going to be very different from yours. If you're fighting, if you're a Chinese fighter fighting an American fighter, you're less likely to, of course, you could say the same in reverse for the American fighter, that you're fighting someone that doesn't know your skill set. But overall, I think, but this is why I would recommend fighters to go through Road to UFC, is because the payday is much bigger. And once you get into the UFC, your contract is much higher. It's 2.5 times bigger. It's a 2.5 times bigger contract to get into the UFC. And as we saw with last season, you don't even have to win in the finals to get signed by the UFC. So even if you're beaten in the last fight, you could still get signed. So I would recommend fighters to do that for sure. I think Contender Series is better left to like fighters. Like the farthest they've gone with Contender Series, I think, is Tajikistan, recruiting fighters from there. They had Nurulo Aliyev last year. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that now that we have these 2 formats, then it's best to kind of stay in your lane. The Georgia O'Keefe of internet beef. Why wasn't Walter Gonsalves the guy Rodtang knocked down in 1 round, then ran around the entire time? I do not know. Do you agree with Sean Strickland that Adesanya is first and only Chinese champion? He did fight under that flag, which is selling out. He's not Chinese. He's from New Zealand, so no. Thought your breakdown of Azat Maksum skills was really good. Thanks. Why do you think people in the MMA space have been watching MMA for a long time? Cannot make good enough. Well, I've never claimed to be like a hyper analyst. If I trained a lot more martial arts, then I think I would get a lot better. And that is something I want to do once I'm able to kind of adjust some life circumstances. I want to eventually go back to training at Muay Thai, preferably at a big gym here in town. So eventually I do want to do that, partially just to add to my knowledge of the game. But there are a lot of good analysts out there. Luke Thomas is good. Dan Hardy, obviously, expert level. So there's a lot of good analysts out there. I can only tell you what I see, and I think having like one reason why I've done this, I'm calling this a series the way that I'm doing it. I also did this for a guy in Road to UFC, where I'm watching through their last 3 fights. It's a very low tech way of doing it. I'm literally just screen recording myself watching YouTube, but it's good for me to be able to exercise that side of my brain, because honestly, most of what I do is not really tapping into that analytical side of things. I'm not really great at breaking down fights. I'm not great at looking at like the teeny tiny minutia and then really able to visualize how a fight may or may not go. So But I appreciate that good feedback. I definitely want to do more of it. Kind of these deep dives into one fighter, looking at their most recent fights, kind of doing like a watch along style is really fun for me. And it seemed those videos are like literally my best performing videos on YouTube. So I'll definitely be doing a lot more of those. If Holly Holm beats Mayra Bueno Silva, will she get a title shot? I really like Holm for her style, what she represents. She's a good person for calling out the mob. I think that she probably will. I would bet on Holly Holm getting that title shot if she wins. Even if it's a dud of a fight, I think she'll probably get it. Which is, I don't know. I don't think that she's the most deserving of that title shot. I think the most deserving is Raquel Pennington, and maybe Juliana Pena is hard for me because she's got the win over Amanda Nunes. But the last time she beat someone that's even still in the UFC was a long time ago. So she doesn't really have like an argument that she is better than like the rest of the current ranked contenders in the UFC. But she did basically talk her way into another title shot with Amanda Nunes, even after Nunes beat her pretty as convincingly as you could. Pretty lopsided scorecards. Juliana Pena talked herself back into a trilogy fight with Nunes. So I feel like she'll probably get it. Could be interesting if we get Holly Holm versus Juliana Pena. I will say the UFC is probably not going to make Pennington versus Holm 3 because those first two fights were not good. So, yeah, I think a lot will depend on how healthy Pena is and if Holly Holm wins the fight. Let's see. Saying that Jan said in a James Lynch interview that she'll be a better champion than Weili because she's prettier. I didn't hear that. I'd have to go back and hear what she meant by that. If she meant that she's more marketable than Weili, yeah, I'd have to look into that. If Tyson Nam loses, which he likely will he get cut? I think so. Yeah, I think so. Okay, asking about the Dracus Adesanya stuff. I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if there are more questions like that. I feel like that's like the hot topic in MMA right now. Personally, I honestly don't really personally, and I know I take this for what it is. I'm a white guy living in the United States, but personally, I just don't really care about the whole race thing. And I feel like it's time to kind of chill about like a lot of he's not a real this country because he didn't grow up like I did, or he's not a real, just like, guys, like, does this really mean anything? Like, I don't know. It feels kind of just like hot air to me, and everyone's accusing this person of like not being a real whatever from this country. Izzy did the same thing with Robert Whittaker, saying like, well, he's not a real New Zealander, even though he was born in New Zealand and moved to Australia because he didn't grow up here. I'm just like, guys, like, what? Who cares? Like, why does this matter? I don't feel like this really matters. I mean, you're born where you're born. You can't change that. Your passport's your passport. Your citizenship is what it is. Like, it feels kind of like a waste of time to be debating like if someone's really from this country or not. I don't know. It just seems like hot air to me. So I don't really care a whole lot. And just personally, I just don't really get drawn into a lot of the like pre-fight drama. If you enjoy that, that's totally fine. I know that's a big reason why a lot of people like watching MMA, and that's that's totally fine. But personally, it doesn't like mean anything to me, and it doesn't really change much of the fight to me. So I don't really care. I wouldn't call myself a fan or not a fan of either of these fighters. I'm really looking forward to the fight, I can tell you that. But I don't, and even after last Saturday and the face off, like that didn't change anything for me at all. I guess I don't like have a side, or at least yet. Maybe I should. Maybe I should care more about this, but I don't. I've like been in MMA long enough and like been through like the Conor and Khabib stuff and heard a lot of like racist stuff from fighters thrown one way to the other. And I hate to say that like a part of me feels like I'm getting a little bit numb to it, but I don't know. I guess that's how I feel. It's just a little bit numb to the Dracus Adesanya stuff. Maybe I'm a terrible person for that, and if so, I'm sorry. Do I think that Chidi losing to Gregory Rodriguez on short notice was really bad for Chidi, who was really good? I don't think that it was necessarily. No, I don't think so. I mean, Gregory Rodriguez he's a killer. Like, that guy's gonna get knocked out or knock someone out in every single fight. So I don't really think that it hurts Chidi's stock a whole lot. He was never like a massive prospect at middleweight, even though he's like beat some good fighters there, and he is a very good fighter. But I don't think it hurts him too much. I think he's still kind of in that space. And Gregory Rodriguez, I kind of see in that space of like, 10, 15 fighters below the middleweight rankings as well. So I think they're both kind of in the same place, if you ask me. From last week, I really like Josh Van's style of fighting. Do you think Malcolm Gordon would be a good next fight for him, or is that too low? No, I think you're right. I think that's a great fight for Josh Van. Honestly, I say like let him crawl along at flyweight. Let him fight like a couple guys lower in that division. That's what they did with Muhammad Mukayev. They did that with him. Just kind of like throwing a lot of fighters lower in the division to let him develop slowly. So I think Malcolm Gordon would be great. Malcolm Gordon is a really good grappler, and I'd love to see that side of Josh Van tested. So for sure, I like it. Thoughts on who Black Combat will pick up to face Saori Ashima in September? Not a lot of options in South Korea. Maybe Yoonjung Park or Yuri Shim if they're not still contracted to Road. Yeah, as far as I know, I don't know about this, but I think those could be good options. I haven't heard anything about that. So far I've only heard of one complete fight for that Black Combat and Deep collab. Who is that? It's one of the bigger weight classes. Anyways, but yeah, I haven't heard who they'll pick for that. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a little bit of a mismatch, but yeah, I would love to see Black Combat have more women. That would be really cool. I think that could add a really good, a new dimension to their format for sure. Park Bok Young, yeah, another one. Let's see, Kendris, do you know how to follow the prospects for UFC PI Combine? I really think as the sport grows, we should be aware of the up-and-coming talent that the PI is helping to grow. Kendris, I have personally reached out to the PI in Shanghai and told them that they should hire me as their like Western social media curator. Because I've thought the exact same thing. I've thought that I would love to like highlight their fighters through like Instagram and Twitter, maybe even YouTube. That would be cool. That's what I'm, in a sense, wanting to do more and more of in my own work within my ecosystem. But the best way that I have seen, and you're probably not going to like this, but is through the Chinese app Douyin, which is their version of TikTok. That one seems to be the one that the fighters themselves update the most often. It seems to be the most like commonly used social media app by Chinese fighters by far, by far. So I know that's not a great answer, probably not the one you want to hear, because I don't know if you have access to download that, and even so, if you don't know Chinese, even harder to navigate. But I was able to download that app without any kind of VPN by basically, and I'm sure this will be illegal by the end of the year, but I was able to switch my app store on my iPhone to China, download this app, and then switch it back. For some reason, it took me so many tries to do that, and the best help I would say is just to Google it. But from there, you can like search the Chinese fighters' names. You're probably just like, hell no. But if you want to, but that's my answer. Otherwise, maybe WeChat. You can follow like the UFC channels on WeChat, and also download the Migu app and follow UFC. Sometimes they will post like exclusive interviews with those fighters. So they give a lot of their coverage to their Chinese fighters to Migu, and they do a great job with it. So unfortunately, nothing in English language that I would say, but just hearing you say that makes me want to step up my game a little bit more, just to give a little bit more like lifestyle coverage. That's typically not something I've done a lot on my channel, is just like checking in on fighters as they're training, posting, hitting the pads, things like that. So yeah, maybe I'll do a little bit more of that. Man, yeah, you're right, Jimmy. How scary was Jack Dilla's opponent having to pull out due to clotting in the brainstem? Feel bad for calling him again and should be wishing him well. Well, I mean, we get replacement fighters every weekend, right? So no shame on you for having that opinion, but I know, and someone brought up a good point on Twitter last week, where they were like, UFC thinks that it's better and cheaper for them to sign fighters from the regional scene as late minute replacements, so that they can sign for like a 10 and 10 contract. They think that that's cheaper, but in the long run, like in situations like this, it would have been better for them to bring up a fighter. I don't know, maybe they tried this, but to bring a fighter already in the UFC, just because they've already gone through a lot of the more rigorous medical testing, and them being able to make the fight and not get flagged for something big like this is a lot less likely. So I thought that was an interesting point for sure, and wish him well. Hopefully his MMA career is not over. If it is, hopefully he has other career options that he can happily engage in. But yeah, wishing Josiah Harrell all the best, hoping for complete healing in his brain. So for sure. Oh man, any chance of an interview with the fighter called Warlord Mom? Would love to hear the origin of that nickname. That is a good question. I don't know if I'll have an interview with her anytime soon, but I will. I'll make a mental note of that to see if I can figure out the origin of that nickname for sure. Do I think Kevin Iole is on the UFC payroll? No, but he definitely gets a lot of opportunities that a lot of media members don't, because he stays on the good side. I don't know if it's just like that he's friends with Dana White, and his friendship is so strong that he just like takes Dana's side every time. But I know it is very strange. Like, you would have thought that he was an employee for UFC.com. But no, I mean, it's interesting because everyone loves to criticize media members who pander to the UFC. But man, like, speaking of as a media member, once you're in the media, there is such like pressure from the UFC and just from the industry as a whole to have favorable opinions toward them, which I know would surprise a lot of people because there's a lot of media members that push back on a lot of what the UFC does. A lot of it, in my opinion, fairly, in some instances not fair, but like if you want to do anything that you want to do, if you want to interview anybody, if you want to have access to all these events, then like just don't like do what Kevin Iole does, and the doors will be open to you. And those, I mean, those are the things that are going to make you more money and get you better positions in the media industry. At least like give you that kind of job security for sure. So while I am pretty like shocked at what he writes, his latest about Francis Ngannou, he's written some pretty critical stuff of Francis Ngannou's career choices, but I can understand how you get there for sure. Totally. Let's see. Some questions. Jaden asked like the same question 6 times about taking money from China. I mean, that's every fighter that fights in China. UFC has done that too. So like every time they go to China, they're selling tickets to Chinese fans and making money that way. So I see zero problem with that. Let's see, y'all. I hate to say it, but I'm gonna have to start blocking some folks. I hate to say it, but it's gonna happen. People freaking out most about the Izzy DDP stuff are Americans with little to no experience traveling outside their home state, let alone abroad. Exactly. That's exactly my feeling of it. That's what I see. Really liked Van's folding elbows in the Junagulov fight. Do you know how good his coaches are? Because he looked really disciplined in that short notice fight. It was sort of a short notice fight. He was supposed to fight on Contender Series in the first episode, so he was training for a fight. I'm trying to remember where Josh Van trains. Okay, at first I thought it might have been the one in Dallas with Saif Saud, but he trains at 4 Ounce Fight Club, which is another pretty good gym out of Houston, I believe, and that's like where Derek Lewis and Lauren Murphy have trained. Daniel Pineda also trains there. Ike Villanueva. Who else trains here? Domingo Pilarte, Dakota Hope. So yeah, a lot of good fighters train at that gym. Josh Van, blue chip prospect. Totally agree with you. Kendra's following up on your question from earlier. When you saw Road to UFC, thought the talent was amazing. It would have been great to know a little about them beforehand. And I think that a lot of the Chinese fans know about them beforehand, but they just have not been able to like, and see, this is what you're getting at is exactly the question that prompted me to get into MMA media, because I knew about some of these Chinese fighters like Yi Jia before they got into Road to UFC. I knew about these fighters, and personally, I was a really big fan of them because they're super, super cool. Like they come from these really beautiful, rugged mountain locations in Tibet. Their families are herding yak, and then they train at Umbo Godot from like age 12 or younger onwards. I just felt like there were so many interesting stories from these Chinese fighters that I was like, man, if people in the West, if English speakers just knew their stories and they really got to see their personalities, if we could find a way to get past the language barrier and get past the like social media Chinese firewall barrier, then I think that these guys could be really big stars even earlier in the UFC before there's someone like at a Zhang Wei Li, Li Jingliang, Song Yadong level. And so, and I know I haven't done all that. I know I'm like putting this all on myself, but like that's something like as this goes on, as my career goes on, like that's where it's going. And I need to do more interviews with some of these guys for sure because I have the hookups. I know all the people that can help me to translate and set those up. So yeah, I think that hearing you say that, yeah, makes me really want to like lean into that interviewing side of things. But some of these fighters just not only are they super cool, have really cool styles, cool personalities, but their upbringings, where they come from, are just really cool places that some of which I've been able to visit in person when I used to live in China and got to travel around a lot. But I'm just like, man, if people could see, if I could like transport people to those places to get more face to face with the folks that live in these cities like Canggu, Xi'an, all the way down to some of these more mountainous or these communities that live on the plains and Mongolia or Inner Mongolia or Sichuan or Sichuan province or Tibet or Xinjiang province. Like, man, I feel like people would really gravitate towards these fighters for sure. Sorry, I didn't put up your question. Yeah, could be cool if I could be a liaison for UFC PI Shanghai. I have got I've got like invitations from some of the coaches there to come hang, and that'll happen someday. That'll definitely happen, and I'll have to feel out like what kind of opportunities are there. But I would really love to work with those guys more closely. I'm really getting like more tight with a lot of the coaches there. 4 or 5 of those guys that are just, I think, like I share a passion with them. They love these Chinese fighters and think the world of them, and so do I. And so I feel like I really bond with them over that. And so I would love to do that. I am very slowly working on my Chinese to be able to potentially do interviews with those fighters without the need of a translator or be able to self-translate. So that would be great. But yeah, it'll happen. I trips over there, hanging out there, producing video content, potentially even being some kind of liaison. All that stuff will happen. Just got to keep my nose to the grindstone. Just got to keep making relationships, be committed to my craft, always be improving little by little, and we'll get there. I've only been in this industry for a little over 2.5 years. In most of what I've done, definitely not all of it, I've had some help from some people, but like a lot of what I've done so far has just been what I've built through my own channels. So but I don't say that to brag. I'm honestly like really nobody does that in MMA media. You have to have help. Like you're gonna hit your own ceiling if you try to be a self-made person. So eventually, like the relationships will grow and we'll be able to figure out some cool stuff. So yeah, excited for the future, what it holds. But yeah, I'll try to post some highlights as well. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for watching, guys. That is all I've got for you today. Be on the lookout for hopefully some breaking news about a new fighter joining the UFC roster from China. Potentially their first fight in the UFC, maybe UFC Singapore, we'll see. But until next time, really appreciate all of you, and we will talk to you next time, and enjoy the fights.